On October 14, 1924, a peculiar item appeared in the catalog of the Sotheby's auction house in New York City. Lot number 402 was described simply as the Whitmore collection, 3 late Victorian porcelain figures. The dolls were exquisite. Their skin was painted with a realism that made bidders uncomfortable. Their glass eyes seemed to follow movement across the room with unsettling precision. They were expected to fetch a modest sum from collectors of antique toys. But when a clumsy porter dropped one of the dolls during the viewing session, the ceramic casing of the left arm shattered. There was no hollow space inside, no sawdust or wooden armature typical of 19th century craftsmanship. Instead, beneath the porcelain shell, the porter found something that made him vomit on the polished floor. Embedded within the ceramic was a radius and an ulna, human bones, small, delicate, and preserved with a chemical mixture that still smelled faintly of lilacs and formaldehyde after 40 years. The police investigation that followed was quietly suppressed by wealthy patrons who did not want their names associated with such a grotesque discovery. The dolls disappeared into private collections, their origins erased from the public record. But those who remember the rumors from the rocky coast of Maine know the truth. They know that those weren't just dolls. They were the legacy of Archibald Whitmore, a man who loved his children so much, he refused to let them grow up. Before we unlock the doors of the Whitmore estate and expose the medical nightmare hidden within its walls, make sure you are subscribed to Legacy of Fear and have rung that notification bell. We uncover the dark, forgotten chapters of American history that science tries to explain, but often cannot. And leave a comment below telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love knowing where our community of mystery enthusiasts is listening from. Now, let us turn the clock back to 1882, to a house built on the edge of the world, where silence was considered the highest virtue. The letter that brought Silas Greaves to the coast of Maine was written on heavy, cream-colored paper that felt almost like fabric to the touch. It was dated September 12, 1882, and the handwriting was impeccable, sharp, angular strokes that spoke of a man who valued precision above all else. Silas was 24 years old, a graduate of Harvard's classics program, but possessed of empty pockets and a coat that was too thin for the coming winter. He had been looking for a position as a tutor in Boston, but the city was crowded with young men seeking the same employment. When the offer came from the Whitmore estate, offering a salary 3 times the standard rate, plus room and board, Silas didn't ask why the position had been vacant for so long. He didn't ask why the previous tutor had left in the middle of the night without collecting his wages. He simply packed his trunk and bought a train ticket north. He arrived at the village of Harrow's Point on a Tuesday afternoon in early November. The town was little more than a cluster of gray shacks huddled against the Atlantic wind, smelling of fish guts and salt spray. The locals watched him disembark with suspicious eyes, their faces weathered and hard, like the granite cliffs that surrounded them. When Silas asked the station master for directions to the Whitmore estate, the man stopped sorting mail and looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You take the coast road north," the man said, pointing a gnarled finger toward a narrow dirt track that disappeared into the fog. "Don't stop until the road ends, and if you have any sense, son, you'll turn around and get back on the train to Boston." "Is there something wrong with the family?" Silas asked, trying to sound confident. The station master spat on the floor. "Ain't seen the family in years, just the supplies going up and the silence coming down. Mr. Whitmore, he don't like motion, says it disturbs the air." Silas dismissed the warning as local superstition. He hired a carriage for an exorbitant fee, the driver refusing to take him all the way to the front gate. "I'll drop you at the property line," the driver said. "Horses get spooked near that house. I won't risk my team." The ride was brutal. The carriage jolted over ruts frozen hard by the November chill. To his right, the Atlantic Ocean churned, gray and violent, crashing against the rocks with a roar that seemed to shake the ground. To his left, Dense forests of pine and spruce stood like silent sentinels, blocking out the fading light. When the Whitmore estate finally came into view, Silas felt a physical drop in his stomach. It was a monstrosity of architecture, a sprawling Queen Anne-style mansion with turrets that pierced the sky like needles. It was painted a dark charcoal gray that made it look like a bruise against the horizon. But what struck Silas most was the stillness. The wind howled around the carriage, whipping the trees and the waves, but the house itself seemed to exist in a vacuum. No shutters banged. No smoke rose from the chimneys, despite the biting cold. It sat on the cliff edge, perfectly preserved, perfectly silent. The driver stopped at the iron gates, which were rusted shut. "This is as far as I go," he muttered, tossing Silas's trunk onto the frozen ground. Before Silas could even pay him the full fare, the man whipped his horses and tore away back toward the village, as if escaping a contagion. Silas was left alone. He dragged his trunk up the long, winding driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under his boots. The sound felt like a violation of the silence. He reached the massive oak front doors, breathless and shivering, and pulled the bell chain. He expected to wait. He expected a servant to shuffle to the door. Instead, the door opened almost instantly, swinging inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. Standing in the foyer was not a butler, but the master of the house himself. Archibald Whitmore was a man who defied easy categorization. He was tall, incredibly thin, wearing a suit of black velvet that seemed to absorb the dim light of the hallway. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretching tight over high cheekbones and a sharp, aquiline nose. But it was his hands that caught Silas's attention. They were encased in thin, white cotton gloves, pristine and spotless. "Mr. Greaves," Whitmore said. His voice was soft, devoid of inflection, like dust settling in an empty room. "You are precisely on time. Punctuality is the first defense against decay." "Mr. Whitmore," Silas stammered, stepping into the warmth of the hall. "Thank you for welcoming me. The journey was—" "Unnecessary details," Whitmore interrupted, raising a gloved hand. "The past is gone, Mr. Greaves. We concern ourselves only with the present moment, preserved indefinitely. Come, you must be sanitized before you see the children." The interior of the house was suffocating. The air was heated to a tropical temperature, far warmer than was comfortable, and it carried a cloying, heavy scent. It smelled of lilacs, thousands of them, but beneath the floral perfume lay something sharper, chemical, and acrid. It reminded Silas of the biology labs at Harvard, the smell of specimens preserved in jars. Whitmore led him to a small washroom off the main hall. "Wash," he commanded, pointing to a basin of steaming water that smelled of carbolic acid. "Hands, face, neck. We cannot introduce outside contaminants to the environment. The children's constitutions are delicate." Silas did as he was told, the harsh soap stinging his wind-chapped skin. As he scrubbed, he glanced around. The house was immaculately clean. There was no dust, no clutter. The furniture was covered in plastic sheeting, as if waiting for a party that would never happen. The mirrors were draped in black cloth. "Why are the mirrors covered?" Silas asked, drying his face with a towel that felt stiff like starched linen. "Vanity is a passage of time," Whitmore said from the doorway. "To look at oneself is to search for age, for flaws. My children are perfect. They have no need to search for flaws that do not exist." Whitmore led him up the grand staircase. The wood beneath their feet did not creak. Silas realized with a start that the stairs were carpeted in thick, dense wool that absorbed every sound. They moved like ghosts through the house. "You will be teaching Elias and Clara," Whitmore explained as they walked down a long, dimly lit corridor. "Elias is 12. Clara is 10. They are exceptional children, quiet, obedient. They do not require vigorous instruction. Your task is to occupy their minds without taxing their bodies. No running, no shouting, no excitement. Excitement burns energy, Mr. Greaves, and energy is finite." "And the baby?" Silas asked. The letter mentioned a third child. Whitmore stopped. He turned slowly to face Silas. In the gaslight, his eyes looked flat like polished stones. William is an infant. He remains in the nursery. You will not see him. He is in a critical stage of development. He is not to be disturbed under any circumstances. They reached a set of double doors at the end of the hall. Whitmore paused, adjusting his gloves, ensuring they were perfectly tight around his wrists. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself, and opened the doors. "Children," he said softly, "your new tutor has arrived." The room was beautiful, painted in soft pastels, filled with expensive rocking horses, dolls, and books. But it felt less like a nursery and more like a museum exhibit. Sitting at a small mahogany table were two children. Elias, the boy, wore a velvet suit with a lace collar, the style of which had been out of fashion for at least a decade. His hair was blonde, combed flat against his skull with a precision that looked almost painted on. Clara, the girl, wore a stiff blue dress with crinolines that puffed out around her like a bell. She had a ribbon tied around her neck, a black velvet choker that contrasted starkly with her pale skin. They did not turn their heads when the door opened. They did not jump up or smile or show any of the curiosity Silas expected from children meeting a stranger. They simply sat, their hands folded in their laps, staring straight ahead. "Elias, Clara," Whitmore said, walking into the room. "This is Mr. Greaves." Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, the children turned their heads in unison. The movement was smooth, but mechanical, as if their necks were guided by gears rather than muscles. "Good afternoon, Mr. Greaves," they said together. Their voices were high and thin, lacking the breathy variation of normal speech. It sounded like air being forced through a flute. Silas stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Hello, Elias. Hello, Clara. I'm very happy to be here." He extended a hand to Elias. The boy looked at the hand, then up at his father. Whitmore gave a barely perceptible nod. Elias reached out. When his hand touched Silas, Silas had to fight the urge to recoil. The boy's hand was cold. Not just cool from the room, which was stiflingly hot, but deep down cold like stone that has never seen the sun. And the skin, it didn't feel like skin. It was smooth, too smooth. It lacked the friction, the moisture, the tiny imperfections of human flesh. It felt like polished wax. "Your hands are cold, son," Silas said instinctively. "I am perfectly preserved," Elias replied. The sentence didn't make sense, but the boy said it with absolute conviction. "That will do," Whitmore said, stepping between them. "The children tire easily. Lesson plans will begin tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. sharp. You will teach them Latin, history, and mathematics. No physical education. No recess. If they wish to go outside, you must consult me first. The air quality must be tested." Whitmore ushered Silas out of the room. As the doors closed, Silas caught one last glimpse of the children. They hadn't moved. They had returned to their original positions, facing forward, staring at the blank wall, their hands folded in their laps. They looked like exquisite, expensive ornaments waiting to be dusted. Dinner that evening was a solitary affair. Silas was served in the small dining room by a maid he hadn't seen before, an older woman named Mrs. Halloway. She moved with a limp and kept her eyes fixed on the floor. She placed a plate of roast beef and boiled potatoes in front of him and turned to leave. "Mrs. Halloway," Silas said, desperate for normal human contact, "have you worked here long?" The woman stopped but didn't turn around. "Since before the children were born, sir." "They seem very well behaved," Silas said carefully. "I've never seen children so still." Mrs. Halloway's shoulders tensed. She turned her head slightly, just enough for Silas to see the fear etched into the lines of her face. "Mr. Whitmore loves them very much," she whispered. "He loves them so much he wants to keep them just as they are, forever." "What does that mean?" "It means you should do your job, sir. Teach them their books, take your wages, but don't touch them. And for God's sake, don't try to make them play." She hurried out before he could ask more. Silas ate quickly, the food tasting like ash in his mouth. The silence of the house pressed in on him. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, expectant silence like a held breath. After dinner, he retired to his room on the second floor. It was comfortable enough, though the window was sealed shut, painted over with layers of thick white paint so it couldn't be opened. The only ventilation came from a small grate high on the wall. Silas sat on the edge of his bed listening. The wind battered the house outside, but inside he heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no creaking floorboards. He decided to write a letter to his sister in Boston, to tell her he had arrived safely. He opened the drawer of the small writing desk in the corner, looking for ink. The drawer was empty, except for a small, leather-bound notebook pushed to the very back. It looked forgotten. Silas pulled it out. It was a diary, cheap and worn. He opened the cover. The name on the inside was Thomas Miller, the previous tutor. Curiosity got the better of him. He flipped through the pages. The entries started normally enough, complaints about the isolation, the strange food, the cold. But as the dates progressed, the handwriting became more erratic, the ink blotched and smeared. October 4th. The smell is getting worse. Whitmore says it's a cleaning solution, but I know that smell. My father was an undertaker. It's the smell of things that should be in the ground. October 12th. I tried to help Clara with her penmanship today. Her hand slipped, the skin on her wrist. It didn't bruise, it dented, like dough. She didn't cry. She just looked at it and pushed it back into shape with her other thumb. October 20th. I heard the drilling again last night, coming from the workshop. Whitmore says he's making toys. What kind of toy screams? I swear I heard a child scream, but in the morning, Elias and Clara were at breakfast, perfect as always. But Elias was walking differently. His limp was gone. He walked smooth now. Too smooth. The last entry was dated November 1st, just 3 days before Silas arrived. It was scrawled in large, frantic letters that tore through the paper. He isn't stopping time. He is replacing it, piece by piece. I saw the baby today. I saw William. The nurse left the door open. God help me, I saw what was in the crib. It wasn't a child. It was a clock. I'm leaving tonight. I don't care about the money. Silas slammed the book shut. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He looked at the door to his room, suddenly feeling very exposed. The lock was a simple brass latch. It wouldn't stop anyone. He stood up and walked to the wall, pressing his ear against the floral wallpaper. He listened. At first there was only the wind, but then, deep in the bowels of the house, vibrating through the timber frame, he heard it. A rhythmic, mechanical sound. Click whir, click whir. It sounded like a giant heartbeat made of gears, and beneath it, a faint, high-pitched sound, the sound of a saw cutting through bone. Silas backed away from the wall. The smell of lilacs seemed to intensify in the room, cloying and sweet, masking the rot underneath. He looked at the sealed window. He looked at the flimsy door. He realized then that the driver had been right. The station master had been right. This wasn't a house. It was a mausoleum, and he was the only living thing inside it that didn't know the rules. Down in the workshop, the sawing stopped. Silas held his breath. Footsteps. Not the soft, muffled footsteps of the carpeted halls. These were heavy, deliberate steps, coming up the stairs, coming toward his room. The footsteps outside Silas's door the previous night had not been an intruder, nor a monster. They had belonged to Archibald Whitmore, checking the locks. Silas had listened, paralyzed in his bed, as the master of the house tested the handle, paused for a count of 5, and then walked away with that same heavy, deliberate tread. It was not the walk of a man patrolling his home. It was the walk of a warden inspecting the cages. Morning arrived on November 5th without the blessing of sunlight. The fog from the Atlantic had rolled in thick and gray, pressing against the sealed windows like wet wool. Silas descended to the dining room at 8:00 a.m. sharp, as instructed. The heat in the house was oppressive. It felt less like a home and more like a greenhouse designed for exotic, poisonous orchids. Elias and Clara were already seated. They wore different clothes today, Elias in a charcoal suit, Clara in a dress of dark maroon, but their posture was identical to the day before. Spines rigid, hands folded, eyes fixed on the empty plates in front of them. "Good morning," Silas said, pulling out his chair. The sound of wood scraping on the floor seemed deafening in the silence. "Good morning, Mr. Greaves," they replied in unison. The timing was perfect, too perfect. Mrs. Halloway entered from the kitchen. She did not bring eggs or toast or porridge. She carried a silver tray holding 3 crystal goblets filled with a thick, opaque pink liquid. She placed one before Elias, one before Clara, and then, to Silas's confusion, set a plate of cold toast and coffee before him. "We do not eat solid food," Silas asked, gesturing to the children's glasses. Archibald Whitmore materialized in the doorway. He had a way of entering rooms without sound, appearing as if he had been standing there all along, simply waiting for the light to catch him. "Digestion is an inefficient process, Mr. Greaves," Whitmore said, taking his seat at the head of the table. He did not eat, he merely watched the children. "The breakdown of solid matter requires energy. It creates waste. It accelerates the decay of the cells. I have synthesized a nutrient solution that provides exactly what the body requires, no more, no less. It preserves the equilibrium." "It looks medicinal," Silas ventured. "It is precise," Whitmore corrected. "Drink, children." Elias and Clara lifted the goblets. They didn't sip. They tilted their heads back and swallowed the viscous fluid in rhythmic gulps. Silas watched Elias' throat. The swallow reflex looked strange, jerky, distinct. Click, swallow, click, swallow. There was a smell coming from the liquid. It drifted across the table, cutting through the aroma of Silas's coffee. It was metallic, like copper pennies held in a sweaty palm, mixed with something sweet and cloying. It smelled like the fluid Silas had seen used in the preservation jars at the University Museum. "Is it palatable?" Silas asked, unable to help himself. Clara lowered her glass. A single drop of the pink fluid lingered on her lip. She did not lick it away. She took a napkin and dabbed it with a motion that was purely functional. "It keeps us well, Mr. Greaves," she said. Her voice was flat. "It keeps us from changing." "Changing?" "Growing old," Whitmore interjected sharply. "Growth is a euphemism for dying, Mr. Greaves. Every day you grow, you are one day closer to the grave. I have chosen to spare my children that tragedy. Now, if you are quite finished with your solids, the schoolroom awaits." The schoolroom was on the second floor, a windowless chamber lined with bookshelves. The gas lamps hissed softly, casting long, wavering shadows. Silas began with Latin. He wrote a conjugation on the slate board, viver, to live. "Elias," Silas said, "conjugate the verb for me." Elias stood up. He did not shift his weight or fidget, he stood like a statue. "Vivo, vivas, vivat, vivimus, vivides, vivant." "Excellent, and the future tense." "Vivim, vives, vivit." The boy recited the words without a pause, without stumbling, without thought. It was like pressing a key on a player piano. "Very good," Silas said. "Now, Clara, history, tell me about the fall of Rome." Clara stood. Rome fell in 476 AD. The causes were political instability, economic decline, and the invasion of Germanic tribes. "And what do you think was the primary cause?" Silas asked, trying to spark a debate. "Was it the internal corruption or the external pressure?" Clara stared at him. Her eyes were a piercing blue, but there was no depth to them. It was like looking at painted glass. "That is not in the text," she said. "I'm asking for your opinion, Clara." "Opinion implies a variable," she said. "Facts are constant. Rome fell, it broke. All things break eventually." Silas felt a chill go down his spine. He walked around the desk. "Not everything breaks, Clara. Things can be mended. People can heal." Father says healing is just a delay, Elias said. He says the only way to stop breaking is to replace the parts that are weak. Silas looked at the boy's hands resting on the desk. In the harsh light of the gas lamp, he noticed something he hadn't seen the day before. On Elias' wrist, just below the cuff of his shirt, there was a fine line. It looked like a scar, but it was too straight. It circled the entire wrist, a perfect red ring. Elias, Silas said gently, "What is that on your arm?" Elias pulled his hand back quickly, covering it with his sleeve. "Nothing." "Did you hurt yourself?" "We do not get hurt," Elias said, his voice rising in pitch, sounding almost like a screech. "We are preserved." Before Silas could press further, the heavy oak door opened. It was Mrs. Halloway. "Mr. Greaves," she said, her eyes darting nervously to the children. "Mr. Whitmore requests your presence in the library during the children's rest period. He wishes to discuss adjustments to the curriculum." "Of course," Silas said. He looked back at the children. They hadn't moved. They were waiting for the command to stop learning. The library was the only room in the house that felt lived in. It was cluttered with papers, diagrams, and glass display cases. But it was not the library of a gentleman scholar. It was the workspace of an obsessive. Whitmore was not there yet. Silas took the opportunity to look around. The bookshelves were filled with titles that made Silas uneasy. The Principles of Taxidermy, Galvanism and the Reanimation of Tissue, Industrial Clockwork Mechanisms, The Anatomy of the Human Joint. On the large central desk, a large diagram was pinned open. It was a sketch of a human knee joint, but overlaying the bone structure were drawings of brass hinges and tension springs. The notes in the margins were written in Whitmore's sharp hand. Subject 3. Cartilage degradation continues. Organic material is insufficient for long-term load bearing. Suggest replacement with vulcanized rubber and titanium alloy. Note, must lubricate the patella to reduce the clicking sound. Silas felt his stomach turn. Subject 3. Was he talking about an animal, a medical cadaver? He moved to a side table where a stack of journals sat. He opened the top one. It was dated 1878, 4 years ago. June 12, 1878. William was born today. He is beautiful, but I can already see the rot. It is in his breath. The same weakness that took his mother. I cannot let him wither. I have begun the preparations. The mold must be cast while the flesh is still firm. August 4, 1879, Elias fell from the tree. A broken arm. He cried for hours. It broke my heart to see him in pain. I have fixed it. I removed the shattered bone. The new armature is stronger. He will never break that arm again. He does not cry anymore. He does not feel it. Silas dropped the journal. His hands were shaking. This wasn't just philosophy. This was surgery. He was cutting them open. He was replacing their parts. "Mr. Greaves." Silas spun around. Whitmore was standing in the shadows of the alcove, watching him. "I trust you find my research compelling." Whitmore stepped into the light. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a teacher finding a student cheating. I was just waiting for you, sir," Silas stammered. "I saw the diagram is Elias. Has Elias had surgery?" Whitmore walked to the desk and traced the line of the mechanical knee with a gloved finger. "Medicine is a crude science, Mr. Greaves. It patches holes, it stitches skin, it hopes for the best. I do not hope, I engineer." "He's a child, not a machine," Silas said, his voice trembling. "He is both," Whitmore said calmly. "The body is a machine, a pump for blood, a bellows for air, levers and pulleys for movement. Why should we accept the inferior parts God gave us when we can fabricate better ones? Elias had weak bones. I gave him strong ones. Is that not the duty of a father, to equip his children for the world?" "But the diary," Silas pointed to the book. "You talked about molds, about casting." "Metaphors, Mr. Greaves. Now about the curriculum. I want you to focus less on history. The past is dead. Focus on physics. Focus on mechanics. I want them to understand how they work." Whitmore dismissed him with a wave of his hand. Silas left the library, his mind reeling. He needed to leave. He needed to get out of this house, but he couldn't leave the children, not now, not knowing what he knew. The incident happened 2 days later, on November 7th. Silas was teaching geography. He had pulled down a large map of the world. "This is the Atlantic Ocean," he said, pointing with a cane. "It is deep and vast." Elias was sitting in the front row. He had been unusually quiet all morning. His face was paler than usual, the waxen sheen of his skin looking almost gray. "Elias," Silas asked, "are you feeling quite well?" Elias blinked slowly. One eye closed a fraction of a second later than the other. "I feel pressure," he said. His voice was distorted, a low buzz underneath the words. "Pressure where?" "In the casing." Suddenly, Elias jerked his head back. A sound came from inside his chest, a loud spring, like a mainspring snapping in a clock. Then the blood started. It didn't gush. It oozed from his left nostril, but it wasn't red. It was the same thick, viscous pink fluid they drank at breakfast. It dripped down onto his velvet suit, staining the lace collar. The smell hit Silas instantly. Formaldehyde, copper, rot. "Oh my God!" Silas rushed forward, pulling out his handkerchief. He pressed it to the boy's nose. "Lean back, Elias, lean back." But Elias didn't lean back. He couldn't. His neck was locked rigid. "I am leaking," Elias said. He didn't sound scared, he sounded annoyed. "Father will be displeased. The seal has failed." "Seal?" Silas stared at the boy. Through the thin fabric of the handkerchief, he felt something hard under the nose. Not cartilage, metal. Silas pulled the handkerchief away. The pink fluid was pouring out faster now, and in the hole of the nostril, glinting in the gaslight, Silas saw it. A silver tube, a small rubber gasket that had split. "Clara," Silas shouted, "go get your father now." Clara didn't run. She stood up, turned precisely 90 degrees and walked out of the room at her usual measured pace. Step, step, step. "Hurry," Silas screamed at her back. Elias began to shake. Not a shiver, but a vibration. His eyes rolled back in his head, revealing not white, but a dull, ceramic ivory. "System, system, error," Elias' voice was looping. "Vive, vive, vivam." The door burst open. Archibald Whitmore stormed in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms that were scarred with chemical burns. He carried a leather medical bag. "Get away from him," Whitmore roared, shoving Silas aside with surprising strength. Whitmore grabbed Elias' face. He didn't comfort the boy. He examined him. He pulled an instrument from his bag, a long, thin screwdriver. "You let him get excited," Whitmore hissed at Silas. "I told you, pressure builds up in the cranial reservoir. High blood pressure blows the gaskets." "He's bleeding," Silas yelled. "He's losing hydraulic fluid," Whitmore corrected. He jammed the screwdriver into Elias' nostril. There was a sickening crunch of metal on metal. Elias didn't scream. He just went limp, his head lolling to the side. The vibration stopped. Is he dead?" Silas whispered. Whitmore lifted Elias effortlessly into his arms. The boy was stiff, his limbs not dangling, but holding their seated shape even in the air. "He is offline," Whitmore said coldly. "I have to take him to the workshop. The pump needs to be recalibrated." He turned to Silas, his eyes blazing with a mania that terrified the tutor. "You are not to leave this room. You are not to follow me. If you come down to the basement, Mr. Greaves, I cannot guarantee your safety. The machinery, it bites." Whitmore carried the boy out. The door slammed shut. Silas heard the key turn in the lock from the outside. Silas was trapped. He pounded on the door, but it was solid oak. He pressed his ear to the floorboards. For hours he listened. He heard the hiss of steam. He heard the clank of chains. He heard Whitmore's voice, muttering, cursing. "Damn the rubber, too brittle, need more tension, bring the saw." And then he heard a sound that made him curl into a ball in the corner of the room, covering his ears. It was the sound of a child crying, but it wasn't Elias. It was a baby. It was William. The cry was high and rhythmic. Wah, wah, wah. It didn't stop to breathe. It didn't change pitch. It was a loop, a recording, or a mechanism designed to mimic distress perfectly, repeating forever. Silas realized then what the pink tonic was. It wasn't food. It was fuel. It was lubricant. Elias wasn't just a sick boy with a brace on his leg. Elias was a shell, a porcelain and skin suit built over a chassis of iron and brass. But if Elias was a machine, where was the original boy? Where were the bones that didn't work? As night fell, the classroom grew freezing cold. The gas lamps flickered and died. In the darkness, Silas made a decision. He wasn't going to wait to be unlocked. He wasn't going to wait to be preserved. He looked at the high window. It was painted shut, yes, but glass breaks. He picked up the heavy iron poker from the cold fireplace. Below him, the drilling stopped. Silence returned to the Whitmore estate. But this time the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. The door handle to the classroom turned, but it did not open. Silas, gripping the iron poker, stood pressed against the wall, holding his breath until his lungs burned. From the hallway, a muffled voice spoke. It was Mrs. Halloway. "I am leaving the tray on the floor, sir. The master says. The master says you are to remain inside until morning, for your own safety. The fumes from the repair work can be hallucinogenic." Silas heard the rattle of porcelain against wood, then the heavy, limping footsteps retreating down the corridor. He waited 10 minutes, then 20. When the grandfather clock in the main hall chimed midnight, a deep, resonant toll that vibrated through the floorboards, he moved. The lock on the classroom door was old, a simple skeleton key mechanism. Silas didn't have a key, but he had the letter opener from the desk. He worked it into the mechanism, sweating in the freezing room. With a sharp click, the tumbler turned. Silas stepped out into the hallway. The house was plunged in darkness, but it wasn't silent. The thumping sound he had heard earlier was louder now. It was coming from beneath the floor. He moved toward the servants' stairs at the back of the house. He knew from the architectural logic of Victorian mansions that the service stairs would lead directly to the scullery and the cellar. As he descended, the air grew thicker. The cloying scent of lilacs vanished, replaced by a stench that made his eyes water. It was the smell of hot grease, ozone, and singed meat. It smelled like a butcher shop located inside a steam engine. He reached the cellar door. It was heavy iron, cool to the touch. It was slightly ajar. A pale, flickering yellow light spilled from the crack, dancing on the stone floor. Silas squeezed through the gap. The basement of the Whitmore estate was vast, spanning the entire footprint of the house. It was a cavern of brick and shadow, illuminated by hissing gas jets. The first thing Silas saw was the animals. Whitmore had called himself a taxidermist, but that word implies working with the dead. What Silas saw here was a mockery of life. On a long trestle table, a cat was walking. It was a tabby, its fur patchy and moth-eaten. It walked in a perfect circle, tethered by a wire to a central pole. Step, step, step. But there was no fluidity in the movement. The cat's legs moved with the jerky precision of pistons. Its eyes were glass, glowing in the gaslight. Silas stepped closer. He saw that the cat's stomach had been replaced with a panel of transparent glass. Inside, where the intestines should have been, a complex arrangement of brass gears and rubber bladders pulsed. The pink fluid, the same tonic the children drank, circulated through clear tubes, pumping into the limbs. "God in heaven," Silas whispered. Further down the room, a raven sat on a perch. It opened its beak to caw, but the sound that came out was the scrape of a metal file against stone. Skrrr. This was Whitmore's testing ground. Before he had touched his children, he had practiced on his pets. He had hollowed them out, stripped away the weak biology, and replaced it with perfect mechanics. Silas moved past the menagerie, his boots sticking to the floor. The stones were coated in a layer of grease and dried fluids. He was looking for Elias. He was looking for the boy who had leaked. At the far end of the workshop, partitioned by a heavy velvet curtain, was a surgical theater. Silas peeked through the curtain. Archibald Whitmore stood over a metal table, his back to Silas. He was wearing a leather apron stained with dark, oily patches. He held a soldering iron in one hand and a scalpel in the other. On the table lay Elias. The boy was stripped to the waist, his chest was open. Silas had to cover his mouth to stifle a scream. The boy's ribcage had been cracked open like a walnut, but there were no lungs inflating and deflating. There was no beating heart. Instead, the chest cavity was filled with a massive, cylindrical pump made of copper. It hissed rhythmically, hiss thump, hiss thump. Connected to the pump were dozens of rubber hoses that snaked into the boy's arms and legs. Whitmore was working on the neck. He was tightening a screw at the base of the throat, right where the voice box would be. Pressure stabilized, Whitmore muttered to himself. He picked up a rag and wiped the pink fluid from the boy's porcelain pale skin. The seal holds. You were careless, Elias, careless. The boy on the table didn't answer. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, unblinking. Silas realized with a jolt of horror that Elias wasn't under anesthesia. He wasn't asleep. He was just off, like a lamp unplugged from the wall. Whitmore turned to grab a jar from a shelf. Silas quickly ducked back into the shadows. He saw a door to his left, slightly hidden behind a stack of crates labeled Imported Porcelain, Dresden. Silas slipped through it, needing to get away from the sight of the open boy. He found himself in a smaller room. It was colder here. It was a storage room. This room smelled of dust and dry rot. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. On these shelves sat rows of large glass jars, the kind used for preserving fruit. But they didn't contain fruit. Silas lifted a lantern that had been left on a crate. The light illuminated the contents of the nearest jar. It was a hand, a child's hand. It floated in yellowed formaldehyde, but the fingers were wrong. The tips had been replaced with silver thimbles. Wires trailed from the wrist. Silas moved down the line. A foot with a wooden heel screwed directly into the calcaneus bone. A jawbone fitted with metal teeth. And then the heads. On the top shelf, looking down at him, were 3 heads in large jars. Their eyes were closed, their hair floating like seaweed. Silas read the labels, written in Whitmore's precise hand. Jar 1, Elias Prototype 1, failed 1878, tissue rejection, necrosis. Jar 2, Elias Prototype 2, failed 1880, hydraulic failure, brain hemorrhage. Jar 3, Elias Prototype 3, failed 1881, structural collapse. Silas stumbled back, knocking into a crate. They weren't just surgeries, they were replacements. The boy upstairs, the boy on the table right now, wasn't the original Elias. The original Elias had died years ago, so had the second and the third. Whitmore wasn't preserving his children. He was rebuilding them. He was using the bones of the dead children to build armatures for the new ones, grafting skin and synthetic flesh over metal frames. Ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a ship, is it still the same ship? If you replace every organ, every bone, every drop of blood, is it still your son? No, Silas whispered. They're dolls, they're meat dolls. He looked at another shelf. There were jars labeled Clara. Clara Prototype 1. Clara Prototype 2. And then a smaller jar, tiny. William Attempt 1. He never stops, Silas realized. He just starts over. He turned to leave, but his foot struck something on the floor. It wasn't a crate. It was a trunk. The lid was open. Inside were clothes, small blood-stained clothes and shoes, dozens of pairs of shoes. And a ledger. Silas picked up the ledger. It wasn't a scientific journal, it was an expense report. January 1878, purchase of cadaver male approx 8 years. Source, Boston Potter's Field, $50. March 1880, purchase of cadaver female approx 10 years. Source, New York Orphanage Fire, $75. Whitmore wasn't just using his own children's remains. He was buying parts. He was harvesting biology from the unwanted, the forgotten, the orphans of the world to build his perfect, immortal family. I see you found the archives. The voice was so close it felt like a breath on Silas's neck. Silas spun around, swinging the lantern wildly. Archibald Whitmore stood in the doorway. He had removed his bloody apron. He was holding a large, heavy wrench. His face was unreadable, neither angry nor sad, just empty. "Mr. Greaves," Whitmore said, stepping into the room, "I told you the basement was unsafe." You monster," Silas choked out, backing away until he hit the shelves. The jars rattled. "They're dead. They're all dead. You've been playing with corpses." "Dead," Whitmore tilted his head. "Define dead, Mr. Greaves. Is a watch dead because it stops ticking? No, you wind it. You replace the spring. Elias had a malfunction. I fixed it. He will be at lessons tomorrow morning." "That thing on the table isn't Elias," Silas shouted. "Elias is in that jar." Whitmore looked at the jar on the top shelf. A flicker of pain crossed his face, quickly suppressed. "That was an early draft. I have improved my methods since then. The current Elias is 40% synthetic. He will last much longer." Whitmore took a step forward, raising the wrench. "You are an educated man, Silas. You appreciate history. Think of this not as murder, but as curation. I am the curator of this family, and I cannot allow you to damage the exhibit." "I'm leaving," Silas said, gripping the lantern. "And I'm taking Clara, if she's even still alive." "Clara?" Whitmore smiled, a thin, colorless expression. "Clara is waiting for her tune-up, but since you are so interested in the process, perhaps you would like to contribute. I am currently low on marrow. Adult marrow is very strong, excellent for binding the joints." Whitmore lunged. Silas didn't think. He threw the lantern. The glass shattered against the chest of Archibald Whitmore. The oil splashed over his velvet suit. The flame caught instantly. Whitmore didn't scream. He didn't flail. He looked down at the fire spreading across his chest with mild annoyance, as if he had spilled tea. "Inefficient," Whitmore muttered. Silas took the opportunity. He shoved past the burning man and ran, back through the workshop, past the open chest of the boy on the table, past the walking cat, past the screeching raven. He scrambled up the stairs, his lungs burning. He burst into the kitchen. He had to get Clara. He had to get the baby. And he had to get out before the fire in the basement found the barrels of formaldehyde. But as he reached the main hall, he stopped. Standing at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the moonlight coming through the transom window, was Clara. She was holding a candelabra. The candles were unlit. "Mr. Greaves," she said, her voice echoing in the vast hall. "Father says we are not to run in the house. It wears down the bearings." Silas looked at her. He looked at the smoke curling up from the cellar door behind him. He realized with a sinking dread that saving these children wasn't going to be as simple as leading them out the door. You can't save a machine that thinks it's a person. Smoke was already curling up the service stairs, thick and black, carrying the acrid stench of burning rubber and preserving fluids. The heat rising from the basement was physical, a solid wall pushing against Silas's back. He stood in the main hall, chest heaving, staring up at Clara. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, the unlit candelabra held perfectly level in her hand. Her blue dress was stiff, the crinolines hiding the shape of her legs entirely. In the flickering light, her face was a mask of serene indifference. "Clara," Silas shouted, coughing as the smoke reached his throat. "We have to leave. The house is on fire." Clara tilted her head. The movement was jerky like a marionette with a tangled string. "Fire is energetic," she said. "Father does not like energy. He will be displeased." "Your father is burning," Silas yelled. He bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. "He's gone, Clara. We have to get you and William out." He reached the landing and grabbed her hand. It was ice cold and hard. He pulled her, expecting resistance, expecting her to pull back. But she didn't pull back, she simply locked. As Silas tugged, Clara's legs didn't move. There was a loud, grinding clunk from beneath her skirt. It sounded like a heavy bolt sliding into place. "My gyros are set for stationary mode after 8:00 p.m., Clara said matter-of-factly. "I cannot descend the stairs without the key." "The key?" Silas stared at her in horror. "Where is the key?" "Father keeps it in his vest pocket." Silas looked down into the dark, smoke-filled hall. Whitmore was down there somewhere, burning. "I don't need a key," Silas muttered. He bent down to pick her up. She was a 10-year-old girl. She shouldn't weigh more than 60 pounds. He lifted. She didn't budge. It was like trying to lift a cast-iron stove. She weighed easily 200 pounds. Her frame wasn't bone. It was lead and steel, ballasted to keep her upright, to keep her perfect posture. "Good God," Silas gasped, dropping her arm. "I am heavy," Clara explained, "so that I do not blow away. Father says the world is full of strong winds." Silas realized then the cruelty of Whitmore's design. He hadn't just fixed them, he had anchored them. He had built them to be beautiful statues that could breathe, but never leave their pedestals. "William," Silas said. "Is William, is he heavy too?" "William is the masterpiece," Clara said. "He is light as a feather, he is the future." Silas didn't wait. He left Clara standing there, an immovable object in a burning house, and sprinted down the hallway toward the nursery. The nursery door was unlocked. Silas burst in. The room was untouched by the smoke so far. It smelled of talcum powder and lilacs. The rocking horse in the corner was still. In the center of the room stood a crib. It was draped in white lace netting. Silas approached it slowly. The silence in the room was absolute, except for one sound. Tick, 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 tick. It wasn't a clock on the wall. It was coming from the crib. Silas reached out and pulled back the netting. Lying on the silk mattress was a baby. He looked perfect. Rosy cheeks, golden curls, eyes closed in peaceful sleep. He was swaddled in a white blanket. "William," Silas whispered. He reached down to touch the infant's cheek. The skin was warm, it yielded to his touch. It felt real. Hope flared in Silas's chest. Maybe the baby was still human. Maybe Whitmore hadn't gotten to him yet. Silas slid his hands under the baby to lift him. Clara was right, he was light, amazingly light. But as Silas lifted the child, the blanket slipped. The baby didn't have legs. Below the waist, the infant's body terminated in a complex brass gyroscope that spun silently, keeping the torso perfectly balanced. Silas gasped and nearly dropped him. He clutched the baby to his chest, his hands feeling the ribs. The chest was vibrating. Tick, tick, tick. Silas pulled open the baby's nightshirt. There was no skin on the chest. It was a transparent crystal pane, shaped like a torso. Inside, sitting where the heart and lungs should be, was the most intricate clockwork mechanism Silas had ever seen. Tiny gold gears spun in a mesmerizing dance. A small bellows made of white kid leather pumped up and down, mimicking breath. And in the center, a ruby bearing pulsed with a red light, not blood, but a bioluminescent chemical reaction. William wasn't a child who had been repaired. William was a machine that had never been alive. He built you, Silas whispered, horror and awe warring in his mind. He built a son from scratch. Put him down. The voice came from the doorway. It was a wet, gargling sound. Silas turned, clutching the mechanical baby. Archibald Whitmore stood in the nursery door. He was a ruin. The velvet suit was gone, burned away. His skin was blackened and peeling. But there was no blood. Where the skin had burned away on his face, silver metal shone through. His left eye was gone, revealing a dark, empty socket with a red lens glowing deep inside. Whitmore limped forward. His left leg dragged, the hydraulic fluid boiling and hissing from a rupture in his thigh. You're one of them, Silas breathed. I am the prototype, Whitmore rasped. Smoke curled from his mouth. I tested everything on myself first. Pain is a signal I learned to disconnect. He held out a charred, skeletal hand made of iron and bone. Give me. The boy, he is delicate. The heat will warp his gears. You're mad, Silas backed away, putting the crib between them. You didn't save them. You killed them and turned them into toys. I saved them from time. Whitmore lunged, moving faster than a burned man should. He crashed into the crib, sending it skidding across the room. Silas dodged, holding William tight. The baby, the machine, began to cry. Why? It was the same loop Silas had heard from the basement, a recorded sound triggered by motion. SHH, Whitmore cooed, his voice distorting into a metallic screech. Father is here. The house is burning, Whitmore, Silas shouted. If you want to save your masterpiece, let me take him out. Out, Whitmore laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Out there, where it rains, where it rusts, where things age, no, they stay here in the case, forever. Whitmore grabbed a heavy brass lamp from a table. He swung it at Silas. Silas ducked. The lamp smashed into the wall. Silas looked at the window. It was painted shut, but it was glass. He was on the second floor. A jump would be dangerous, but the fire was already eating the hallway carpet. He looked at the mechanical baby in his arms. He looked at Whitmore, a monster of metal and burnt flesh. I'm sorry, Silas whispered to the baby. He didn't jump with the baby. He threw the baby. He hurled William, the masterpiece, the clockwork son, straight at the window. Whitmore screamed. It was a sound of pure mechanical anguish. No. He forgot Silas. He forgot the fire. He scrambled toward the broken window, clawing at the frame, trying to reach his falling son. Silas didn't wait. He bolted for the door. The hallway was an inferno. The wallpaper was peeling in flaming strips. Clara was still standing at the top of the stairs. The fire was licking at the hem of her dress. She hadn't moved. She was watching the flames with mild interest. Clara, Silas shouted, covering his face with his arm. It is very bright, Clara said. Is this the sun? Silas tried to reach her, but a beam from the ceiling collapsed between them, bringing down a curtain of fire. Clara! Through the flames he saw her. She looked at him, and for the first time her expression changed. The corners of her mouth twitched, not a smile, a glitch. System critical, she said. Thermal limit reached. Then her eyes, those blue glass eyes, cracked. Ping! Silas knew he couldn't reach her, he couldn't lift her, and she couldn't walk. He turned and ran for the back stairs. The smoke blinded him. He stumbled, fell, crawled. He felt the heat singing his hair. He burst out of the kitchen door and fell into the snow. The cold air hit his lungs like knives. He rolled over, gasping, coughing up black soot. He looked up at the house. It was a torch. The flames were shooting out of the turret windows. The roof was groaning. And there in the snow, a few feet away, lay William. The bundle of blankets had come undone. The baby lay face down. The porcelain head had shattered on impact. Silas crawled over to it. The gears were spilled out onto the snow like guts, springs and cogs and the little white bellows. And the heart, the ruby bearing, was still pulsing faintly. Tick, tick, tick. Silas reached out to touch it. But then a shadow fell over him. He looked back at the house. In the broken window of the nursery, surrounded by flames, stood Archibald Whitmore. He wasn't looking at Silas. He was looking at the snow where William lay. And then Whitmore did something impossible. He stepped out. He didn't fall. He stepped into the air, and a cable, a winch line attached to his back, lowered him down. He descended like a spider, smoke trailing from his body. Silas scrambled backward in the snow. He's not human. He's not human. Whitmore landed in the snow. He walked over to the shattered remains of William. He picked up the gears, the springs, the broken porcelain face. He cradled them against his charred chest. Then he turned his one red eye toward Silas. "You broke him," Whitmore said. His voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. "You broke my son." Silas scrambled to his feet and ran. He ran into the woods, into the dark, freezing night. He didn't look back. He ran until his legs gave out. Behind him, the Whitmore estate burned. But Silas knew, with a sickening certainty, that the fire wouldn't be enough to kill something that wasn't alive. Silas Greaves did not stop running until he saw the lights of Harrow's Point. His boots were ruined, soaked through with snow and mud. His lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, but the terror driving him was colder than the Maine winter. When he stumbled into the village tavern, the Salt and Anchor, it was nearly 4:00 a.m. The fishermen were just gathering for their morning coffee. They looked up as the door burst open. Silas stood there, a phantom in a soot-stained coat, shivering violently. He's made of metal," Silas gasped, collapsing onto a bench. The baby was a clock. The house is burning." The room went silent. The men exchanged glances. They didn't look surprised. They looked resigned. An old man, the tavern owner, walked over and placed a heavy hand on Silas's shoulder. "Drink this, son," he said, sliding a mug of hot rum across the table. "We saw the smoke an hour ago." "You have to send help," Silas grabbed the man's arm. "You have to send the fire brigade. There might be. Clara might still be." He stopped. He remembered Clara standing on the stairs, her eyes cracking, her gyroscope locked. Clara wasn't someone to be saved. She was something to be salvaged. "There's no fire brigade going up that cliff tonight," the old man said quietly. "Road iced over. And besides, Mr. Whitmore, he don't like visitors." "He's a monster," Silas screamed, the hysteria finally breaking through. "He hollowed them out. He turned his children into machines." The tavern owner looked Silas in the eye. His expression was sad but hard. "We know he was a tinkerer, son. We know he bought parts from the city. But Archibald Whitmore owns half this town. He owns the boats. He owns the cannery, so if you saw something up there, maybe you didn't see it. Maybe it was just the smoke getting to your head." Silas realized then the true power of the Whitmore family. It wasn't just the money. It was the silence they could buy. He drank the rum. He didn't say another word. The official report, filed by Constable Jeremiah Thorne on November 10, 1882, was a masterpiece of fiction. It stated that a tragic accident had occurred in the laboratory of the renowned inventor Archibald Whitmore. A chemical fire had spread rapidly through the timber frame of the mansion. Mr. Whitmore, in a heroic attempt to save his invalid children, Elias, Clara, and infant William, had perished alongside them in the flames. The report noted that, due to the intensity of the heat, no identifiable remains were recovered. Silas read the report 3 days later in a boarding house in Boston. He had fled Maine on the first train out of Harrow's Point. He had left his trunk, his clothes, and his wages behind. All he had was the clothes on his back and the memory of the ticking heart in the snow. He wanted to go to the police. He wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, but he remembered the look in the tavern owner's eyes. Maybe you didn't see it. And who would believe him? Who would believe that a man had replaced his son's lungs with bellows? Who would believe that a baby could shatter like a teacup? So Silas did what most people do when faced with a horror too great to comprehend. He buried it. He changed his name. He moved west, eventually settling in Ohio. He became an accountant, a profession of numbers, of certainty, where 1 + 1 always equaled 2 and nothing ever bled pink fluid. But he never married, he never had children, and he never ever allowed a clock in his house. Silas died in 1918, a victim of the Spanish flu. When his landlady cleared out his apartment, she found a stack of journals hidden under the floorboards. They were rambling, paranoid writings. Silas wrote about the tinkerers, men who he claimed were watching him from the shadows. He wrote about seeing people on the street who walked too smoothly, whose eyes didn't blink often enough. July 14, 1902. I saw a girl in the park today. She looked like Clara, same blue dress, same ribbon. She was feeding the ducks, but she threw the bread with a motion that was wrong, a perfect arc every time. I tried to talk to her. I grabbed her arm. It was hard, like iron under velvet. She looked at me and smiled, but her eyes didn't move. I ran. God help me, I ran. Most people dismissed these journals as the ravings of a lonely, sick man. But then came 1924. The Whitmore estate had lain in ruins for 40 years. The stone shell of the house still stood on the cliff, blackened and hollow, a skull staring out at the sea. In the summer of 1924, a group of urban explorers, wealthy young men looking for souvenirs, ventured into the ruins. They went down into the cellar. The fire had collapsed the upper floors, sealing the basement in a tomb of rubble. But these men brought pickaxes. They broke through into a sub-basement that even Silas hadn't known about, a fireproof vault. Inside they found them. 3 dolls. They were scorched, their clothes ragged, but they were intact. One was a boy, about 12 years old. One was a girl, about 10. And one was a baby. The explorers assumed they were just incredibly detailed mannequins, perhaps prototypes for some forgotten invention. They brought them back to New York. They listed them in the Sotheby's catalog as the Whitmore collection. We know what happened next. The porter dropped the doll, the arm shattered, the bone was revealed. The auction was canceled. The police seized the items. The coroner, Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, a distant cousin of Silas, in a twist of irony that history often enjoys, performed the autopsies on the dolls. His report, which was sealed for 50 years, contained phrases that no medical professional should ever have to write. Subject A, the boy. The skeletal structure is a hybrid. The femur is human but drilled out and fitted with a titanium rod. The musculature has been replaced with vulcanized rubber bands. The brain case is empty, save for a blackened, fused lump of what appears to be a primitive logic engine. Subject B, the girl. The subject appears to have been conscious at the time of death. The jaw is locked in a scream, but there are no vocal cords, only a silver flute embedded in the throat. But it was the third subject that terrified Dr. Penhaligon the most. The baby. When they opened the chest of the infant, they found the clockwork mechanism Silas had described. It was rusted, fused by heat. But deep inside the main gear, protected by a casing of diamond-hard glass, they found a scrap of paper, a note. It was written in Archibald Whitmore's handwriting. It was dated November 7, 1882, the day of the fire. It read, "I have succeeded. The flesh burns, but the work remains. My son is safe. He will tick forever." The dolls from the auction were supposedly destroyed, burned in a police incinerator to hide the horror. But records from the evidence locker show a discrepancy. 3 items checked in, 0 items checked out. And in Harrow's Point, the locals still don't go near the cliffs after dark. They tell stories. They say that on quiet nights, when the wind dies down, you can hear sounds coming from the ruins of the Whitmore estate. Not ghost sounds, not moans or chains. Mechanical sounds. Click word. They say that Archibald Whitmore didn't die in the fire. They say he had modified himself too much to burn. They say he is still down there in the deep tunnels beneath the cliff, fixing his children, polishing their porcelain faces, oiling their joints. And sometimes hikers find things in the woods. A perfectly preserved finger made of wax. A glass eye staring up from the mud. A dead raven with gears in its stomach. Is it just folklore? A story to scare children into obeying their parents? Be good, or the Clockwork Man will come and take your bones. Or is it possible that Silas Greaves was right? That Archibald Whitmore found a way to cheat death by becoming something that can never die? The story of the Whitmore family forces us to ask a terrifying question. What is the line between healing and replacing? Between saving a life and manufacturing a ghost? Archibald Whitmore believed he was a loving father. He believed he was saving his children from the cruelty of time. But in doing so, he became a monster more enduring than time itself. History is full of men who thought they could outsmart God. Men who treated the human body not as a temple, but as a machine to be tinkered with. The Whitmore estate is gone, but the philosophy remains. Every time we try to perfect ourselves, to erase our flaws, to stop the clock, are we stepping closer to that workshop in the cellar? What do you think really happened in 1882? Were the children dead before Silas arrived? Was Whitmore a genius or a madman? Or perhaps they are still out there, ticking away in the dark. If you enjoyed this journey into the macabre, please leave a like and share this video with someone who trusts the silence a little too much. And remember to subscribe to Legacy of Fear, because the archives are vast and the dead are never truly quiet. I'm your host, and until next time, check the locks on your windows and listen closely to the ticking of your clock.